Season 5 of The Dragon Prince restored a lot of lost confidence in the show. It completed the ideas, intentions, and conflicts set up by Season 4, not in a rote or sentimental way, but in a way that honored their complexity and their fullness. The Rayla and Callum story, the story of Viren and Claudia, most especially, and even smaller stories like that of Erebos and that of Karim and Luxoria are all expanded upon. Not all of these stories are of equal quality, and I certainly want to see the Karim storyline come to some sort of culmination, or at least become of more interest, and I want to know significantly more about Erebos other than just viewing him as this baddie who has engineered conflict throughout history. But Season 5 did a lot of solid and thoughtful work expanding the scope of the show while remaining focused on the storylines that are of most importance. We get a lot of focus on the water and the tides. We get Callum's poem, we get Rayla confronting her fear of water, we get an entire portion of the story that takes place on a ship. This is probably the season of the show that most uses and utilizes the setting and the basic conceit of the primal source in the title to good effect. And yet Season 6 can do even more. What most tantalizes me is Claudia's story. I remember when I watched Claudia's Descent, the Robert Browning poem Childe Roland to the Dark Tower came. It is a grisly poem, a grim poem, a poem wherein a lonely and solemn knight has journeyed through a blighted world and has lost all his convictions and all his idealism, all his certainty about what awaits him. He has fundamentally become detached from all the people he's loved and lost. He had a sense of purpose, a sense of identity when he began his journey, but the tumult of his experience, the disorientation of what he has seen, has revealed all of those deeply held convictions to be nothing but abstractions, and now the knight blindly pushes toward the end, as much as anything just to see his journey to the end, to bring it to some sort of clarity, some order, whatever that order is, even if it's terrible. And yet there's no definite resolution. The Dragon Prince, even in my most emphatic praise for it, would not say is on the same level as one of the great poems of 19th century literature, but nonetheless, I feel a lot of that same anxiety and same desolate alienation reflected in the story of Claudia. She is someone who was a bit dorky and a bit weird at the start. She was beloved of Callum, and had the chaos of the narrative not taken place, they might have gotten married someday. But that's not where their journeys led them. Callum, no longer insecure, has faced the tensions and the unease of a vast world that is constantly in flux and constantly in danger of splitting apart and fragmenting, and he, despite his own personal failings and weaknesses, has the burden of attempting to piece it back together. Claudia has become more alone. She has become more scared of others and scared of the world, scared of how it views her, and scared of what it has done to those that she loves. She committed herself fully to saving Viren. In a life torn asunder from old certainty, she committed herself to saving her father, not just because she loved him dearly, although she did, but also because it gave her a semblance of coherence in her life. It gave her a sense of continuity. It gave her a center point around which she can form her basic self-concept. And yet, while understandable, that devotion becomes obsession. She is far more committed than Viren in keeping Viren alive. Viren did not quite give up on living, not actively so at least, but he ultimately decided to stop fighting fate, to stop relying on the unnatural and the perverse to try to reverse what he believes to be unjust in the world. He realized that such a fight was ultimately pointless, that his perspective was too narrow and too monomaniac and too utilitarian. He became so committed to his goals and so unwilling to listen to critiques of them, so unwilling to consider that his routines were not leading him in the right direction, that his ideology was a bit askew, that he ultimately hurt himself and others, and he hurt himself and others more and more and more as he tried even darker and more immoral actions in order to reverse the decline he suffered, to try to save himself and save others and prove that his ideals were righteous. So he stops fighting. He is melancholic about this, but he ultimately accepts the fragility of his own viewpoint. And he hopes in doing so, and accepting death, to convince Claudia that she can abstain from this dark path. That she can ultimately accept the dangers caused by pursuing such a self-righteous obsession. It's not enough to fill the void within her. She might be actively pursuing what she believes to be right, but ultimately, she causes harm to herself and others because she ultimately cannot accept the flaws in her perspective. She cannot accept the fact that she needs to view her perspective critically, that she needs to engage with the actual consequences and the actual truth of what she has done, what has happened because of what she has done, and hold it up to her ideals and realize that those ideals are flawed, that they are just abstractions that seem pretty in theory but in practice are actively harmful. Will Claudia do this? I don't know. I believe she is a bit too committed to the routines she has set out for herself. She might become even more obsessive. She might refuse to accept that Viren is dead. She certainly might refuse to accept that Viren chose to die in order to try to save her. I want to see more of Claudia. I want to see her fighting through her desperation. I don't want Viren to come back. Viren's story is finished, and it's a peaceful ending. but I want to see how Claudia responds to the reality of death, to the reality that any ambitions, any yearnings are ultimately inadequate in a world of tumult, of chaos, a world of constant impressions, of constant sensations that overthrow and undermine any singular abstract perspective, however pretty it might seem to her. This is the story of epic. It goes all the way back to the tale of Gilgamesh. That story ends with Gilgamesh trying to find a way to live forever, to overcome the reality of death. He finds the only person who has survived since the Great Flood many, many years ago. And Gilgamesh is given a test to see if he can become immortal, but ultimately he fails. He cannot do it. And so he returns. Wiser, but sadder, having the knowledge gained from experience and the instability of having that experience overwhelm and erode his convictions and his ideals. They seem so hollow and arbitrary and abstract now. Stories like this are quite common in myth. Buddhism and Hinduism especially are filled with them. They're in the Greek tradition too. I always think of the Orpheus and Eurydice myth, which is about a lot of things. But ultimately, it's about a journey into the underworld by a person with incredible creative power who can make the world come alive with his music. It erupts into life and vitality, and yet that power is limited. He confronts the reality of ultimately being unable to save the person he loves the most. Will Claudia arrive at such a revelation? Will she understand how incomplete her perspective is when undermined by unprecedented sensations and ideals? The world outside herself pushes in on her absolutism, on her dogmatism, on her obsessiveness, and reveals how tenuous those obsessive declarations really are. I also want to see how Callum interacts with Claudia. I wish we had gotten to see more of Callum and Claudia before. Claudia loved Callum, and he loved her. That deserves more of a moment to really consider the implications of the full severing of such a bond than the show has hitherto given. It's not just, oh, I thought Claudia was good, but she's really bad. This is a person who was very important to me. This is a person I was willing to spend my life with. And now this is a person who has become so driven by obsession, so driven by monomania, that she ultimately is not someone I can relate to anymore. Of course, I want to see how other characters react to her too. This is a real environment that can produce some poignant, heartfelt storytelling. Soren is more emotionally broad-minded than he is often given credit for. I assume he probably has a lot to say on this, even if he can't quite put it into the perfect words. Perhaps Ezra has something to say about it. But I'm most interested in Callum. Callum is a good character, but part of me wants him to be great. And I don't think he's quite there yet. There's this next level about Callum that we haven't quite gotten to yet, in the same way that we have gotten it for someone like Claudia or Viren. I want him to confront a truly uncomfortable situation, one that he can't easily repair, one that tests all his convictions and even the newfound trust he has with Rayla, when he is forced to challenge his beliefs, when the vicissitudes of existence undermine his convictions in such a way that they cannot easily be repaired. What will he do? I want to see it. So anyway, thank you all for watching. If you liked what you saw today, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Donate to my Patreon if you can, and you want to see more videos like this before anyone else. Keep watching The Dragon Prince. I can't wait to see Season 6. It's going to be wild with all this cosmic and celestial imagery. I hope the show really pushes into full surrealism. I can't wait. Anyway, tune in soon for the next analysis. Will be coming soon, that I promise you. Thank you all again. Adios, comrades.